Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this. Welcome back to another fantastic episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers. And today we have an absolute journey of an episode with the wonderful man that is Josh Connolly. I've said this a few times recently, conversations sometimes take on a life of their own and they just kind of move and weave in ways that you don't expect. And this was definitely one of them. Josh has a really interesting story of his own life and the work that he does around resiliency coaching, around emotional wellness, emotional openness, getting more in touch with a feeling. He's also a breathwork coach. He's also a public speaker and speaks a lot about addiction and toxic people, why we should remove those people from our lives. He talks about a real range of things, but what more than anything, he's just very grounded, very down to earth, very open to not being right, open to being wrong. It's something we talk about in the episode. And we weave in many topics. We start off talking about how we think, and we talk a little bit about why sometimes we don't want to be wrong and we become defensive, and how we can kind of get out of that, and why certain things have happened in the world where we struggle to sometimes step into other people's shoes, and this is something that we talk about a couple of times in the episode, but that's one of those things that affects every aspect of your life, from your relationship with your partner, if you have one, or your dating life, or your relationship with your kids, being able to see the world from their shoes and the importance of that, and why that's one of the things that can really save humanity. We talk about that. We talk about addiction, and his story around addiction, and how growing up with addiction can cause problems. We also talk about how we live in a highly medicalized world, and how our emotions are medicalized, and the danger of that, and how there are other ways in which we can heal, and the importance, we talk about this a couple of times, the importance of making sense of our pain and not just avoiding it. We talk about escape versus curiosity, the power of curiosity as well, and we talk about ultimately how we can live happier lives, how we can move forward and have less strongly held points of view. So it's a very interesting episode. It was wonderful to record with Josh. It was very fun, very enjoyable. So I am very excited for you to listen to this. But before we get into that, I'm going to let you know about some one piece that's coming up, especially me and also have really seen how the work we do individually with people, she works with women, I often work with men, and how, it started to shift their ability to get into relationships, connect while into relationships and so forth. So that's all the one-to-one work we do. And we've also seen, we've had our own group programs. I've been running one with a group of men. She's been running one with a group of women, and how powerful that is. So we've decided to bring a lot of our knowledge together, the two of us, to run a group program that's open to singles and couples. And it's all about how you can learn the art of deeply connected and authentic relating inside your relationships, inside your dating life. Because what we were seeing is there's some things that we always have to work on to start enjoying our dating life more, to getting more out of it, to showing up honestly and openly and connecting with people in a way that leads to happier relationships. Or we were seeing common things that are very similar that we need to work on when we're in relationship to keep the relationship in a place of connectedness and joy and passion and interestingness, if that's even a word. So that's something that we're running in September and October. We're currently taking enrollment for that. So if it's something you're interested in, please get in contact. If you're hearing that and you're thinking, oh, this could be interesting. I've listened to David. I've listened to also. I really enjoyed the episode that they did. We did an episode together, episode number 100, if it's something you want to go back and listen to. And I feel I could learn something. Then follow that message, follow the call, because sometimes we then rationalize and say we shouldn't do something because X, Y, and Z, the cost and blah, blah, blah. But we're really flexible in terms of how you can pay and all that kind of good things. But we want people who really want to make a change. If you feel this desire to have better relationships, to really show up and find a partner that is as deeply committed to growing, deeply committed to being connected as well, and being open and loving each other deeply, then this is a wonderful thing for you to get involved in, to help you, deepen into those desires, but also start to find somebody or deepen that inside of your relationship. So if you feel free, the details are in the show notes. You can get in contact with me, you can get in contact with Orsa, and we can have a chat about, bringing you in on that. But I think that is the only thing I've got coming up that's, relevant now. So without further ado, I'll let you get into this wonderful episode. Welcome back, listeners. Back with another wonderful episode. I have a man who I've been following on Instagram for quite a while, and I love his very down-to-earth delivery of topics that have been quite complex and quite difficult for us to get into. His focus on emotions and the importance of those, and the importance of us, just knowing how we feel and becoming resilient to that as well. Probably something we'll talk about a little bit today. Today we have with us resilience coach Josh Connolly. How are you doing, Josh?
Good, thank you. Good to be here, and I appreciate what you've just said in the introduction as well. It's nice to hear, and looking forward to what we're going to chat about.
Yeah. I find with Instagram, a lot of people fall into the category of like putting out content that they just think is going to get them more likes and more followers, and doesn't really impact people. Or as I like to say, some people's content, when you listen to it, it kind of aggresses you. It kind of hits you and you're like, oh wow, I don't know how I feel about that. And I get that often with the things you put out. Like, it hits me and I'm like, oh, how do I feel about this? And I take that as a really good sign, because otherwise we end up in this kind of world where we take on all this content and we're like, oh my God, yeah, I totally agree with that. That's great. But actually, that's not actually what's good for us in the long run. We need stuff to challenge our ideas and our little glass houses.
Yeah, look, and I'm really glad you take that from it, because I think it's really important. I think it's important to, if I'm going to put content out, it means a lot to me to make sure that I'm not just churning out just like rhetoric that might, I don't know, get the likes and all that kind of stuff. I think my biggest learnings on my own journey have normally been born out of something that's made me angry. Somebody's told me something and it's really pissed me off, and I've gone away and hated that person, and then looked at it for a little bit and realized the reason I'm pissed off is because either they're right or it's triggered a part of me that I needed to learn. So I think if content should do that to you, because I think that's where we're learning, right, and growing, much like you've just said, really.
It's causing us to reach into or step into that area that's just outside our comfort zone, where we can stretch into.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that area, and that area just outside our comfort zone is not comfortable, right? So if people are just putting out stuff that makes you feel very comfortable, then I guess it's not you're not growing, really, are you? It might make you feel good and happy in the space that you're in, but I think if you want that growth, you need to step into that next zone, and that's not always comfortable.
Most likely step into a little bit of uncomfortability over the next hour. So just warning you all. Maybe you find yourself a comfortable seat. If you're driving, make sure you're paying attention to the road. Maybe you need to pull over.
Yeah. And if I say anything that makes you too angry, don't at me, because I might change my mind tomorrow. So
we all reserve the right to change our mind each day about our opinions and thoughts and ideas.
it's healthy. You know, I say the main mantra, and this is true, and it's been true for me for a few years now. The main mantra that I live by is to accept and believe and know that every morning I could wake up and be wrong about everything that I've ever believed. And I think that's really important. You know, that's ultimately, that is the curiosity that I've needed to be able to move through my life, particularly in the last 10 years. And it's, you know, my journey has been a series of shedding my skin, you know, like as in talking about a certain thing and believing it's the way and thinking that everybody else should be doing it. And then getting to a certain point and realizing this don't work for me anymore. I was wrong. And, you know, there's so much joy in being wrong, if you can see it in that way. Because when I find out that I'm wrong about something and there's something new to explore, it's so exciting, because I know I'm about to go on a whole new journey here, and I'm about to find out a load of new stuff. And by the end of this journey, I'm going to be at a new place. And so I think if you live like that, I mean, the only risk in living by the idea that you could be wrong about everything is that you might be right. And if you know what I mean, so by exploring it, you're either going to like further cement and get the, you know, the joy of being right about something, or you're going to learn something new and you're going to grow and it's going to, you're going to evolve as a person. So in that way, there's no risk, right?
Yeah. And it kind of contradicts what how a lot of people move through the world with, like, really strongly held opinions and ideas of how things are, very black and white. And when challenged or given new evidence, instead of going, well, let me have a think about that and see what could be true, they step straight into a position of defensiveness and want to always, because I guess it's that they are more attached to the need to be right than to the need to learn and grow.
Exactly. And we get caught up in that, right? And then we also approach most conversations with the belief that we're the good guy, right? I like to think that I'm one of the good guys. And so if I see something or a piece of content that makes me feel like I'm wrong about something, or I react in a way that maybe is from a part of me that's not quite as desirable and doesn't feed into being the good guy, yeah, then I'm going to get even more defensive, and I'm going to start like desperately trying to be right and desperately trying to prove that I'm the good guy. Yeah. Where actually the real growth is going, oh, this might be a part of me that's really not very nice, and that I need to look at and work and understand why it's there. Right. And that's, you know, that can breed real growth, you know, real and true growth.
Yeah. And I see this a lot around the conversation that we have around the topic of toxic masculinity. Around that, as soon as the words are put together and said, there's a defensiveness. And I have to even admit that I feel in my own body when I hear the term toxic masculinity, there's a part of my body that tightens up and gets ready to defend, as if someone's going to say something to attack me. And I have to kind of remind myself that those words aren't a personal attack on me as a man. But I see through online, and even some of the men that I've worked with, that as soon as they hear those words, they instantly become defensive and want to attack whatever's said by that person talking about toxic masculinity.
Yeah. And look, but that, you know, we live in a polarized world as well, right? So the moment any term gets created, it can become weaponized, right? So you take the term toxic masculinity, and I think if you take the essence of what I believe it to be, right, it's useful. However, it does get weaponized and used in completely the wrong way, right? And so then it does become problematic, which is why in the end, I think labels can be useful as a starting point, but we shouldn't get caught up in them, right? One of the other things that I talk about, links to this, talk about toxic positivity, right? Where, you know, people just be positive about everything and kind of mask all the difficult emotions and sweep them under the carpet, right? I was on a podcast talking about that, I don't know, some time ago. And the more we unpacked it, the more I was like, it's actually not, like, toxic positivity is probably the wrong word for it, right? Because it's like it's more like survival positivity, right? I mean, the intent is positive, really. So it's not an attempt to be horrible or nasty, right? The intent is good. However, what it does create is something that does become quite toxic if it means I'm pushing down my emotions, right? So the same is true And similar, when we talk about what we might call toxic masculinity, I just get a little bit like, maybe we should try and stop using the term and find better, like, let's use language more. Let's get more like literate with our language and try and be deeper and try and not box something up under a nice heading, right? That's what we do. Yeah, we find a term that resonates. So I think toxic masculinity at the beginning really resonated for people, and it's like, yeah, it makes sense. But then we just start trying to bunch everything into it and squeeze everything underneath it, and then it just becomes a problem, right? So like, it's great for a starting point, but then I guess we should always look to try and outgrow those terms, yeah, and find something new, maybe.
Yeah, I agree. And I had a conversation with a guy called Mark Green not too long ago, and he talks about something called the Manbox, which you might have heard of. It comes from a book called Act Like a Manbox, where there's particular tenets of what it is to be a real man. And he calls it Manbox culture, which I think is quite a nice shift. Is that when we talk about the culture of something, we're not talking about the people in the culture. We're talking about how the culture surrounds people and causes people to do things. And it creates enough space that we can talk about the culture without feeling that it's personal, because culture isn't personal to anybody. Culture is this kind of, every country, sometimes towns and cities have their own culture, but we tend to be slightly less defensive about culture. It just gives us space to talk about it as some actions or the way we're socialized into things. So I'm coming to using the term culture, even the culture of toxic masculinity, has a lighter feel that allows maybe more people to move into that conversation without feeling that it's an attack on them.
Yeah. And it makes the conversation more accessible to people, and feels less victimizing, right? And it feels less blaming, and actually is more factual. Really, factual, is that the right word? But it's more truthful, right? Because I don't know about you, but the more I look at anything in terms of the South and who we are as people and what that means and how we experience the world, the more I realize we need to talk way more about the societal factors and the culture anyway. I mean, it's mad that we're already here, because I've just been writing a piece about that to go out today, about how we individualize everything, right? When actually we need to look at the cultures and the societies and the systems that people exist in, because that's where the fault, if that's the right word, but that's where the fault lies, right? It's in the way that we've been conditioned in the cultures that we exist in.
Yeah. The systems that are around us. It almost removes our ability to think freely for ourselves, because the systems are there, always kind of like puppet masters, nudging us and directing us into certain positions and to do certain things. But yet we still have this individual idea that we have this free will that we're always exercising. But if we take it from a kind of cultural and societal point of view, we can start to see that actually sometimes we don't really have a choice in certain situations. Like we have choice, but our choices are pretty shit. So we end up taking certain roads just simply because of all the things that have happened to us before, that a society or culture have kind of conditioned us or trained us into doing and thinking.
Yeah, and we're trained to believe that, right? We're trained to believe that you can be anything that you want to be, right? As long as you try hard enough, you got the same chance as everybody else, right? In America, they call it the American dream, right? Anyone can be the president or whatever, right? And it ain't true. It's not. I mean, it's not true. Like a lot of people can't be anything they want to be. Not when you add in all of the societal effects. I mean, look, there will always be people that have come from absolutely nowhere and made it, right? And we can point to them and we can go see anybody can do it, right? And there is some truth in that, but there's also not a lot of truth in it. When you look at the systems that we're all pushed into and that we're forced through, if you grow up in a, I don't know, on a council estate, single parent, ethnic minority in England, right? You haven't got the same chance as somebody who grows up in a, family with two parents and that goes to, I don't know, private school. You haven't got the same chance. And you could both put in the same amount of effort and you wouldn't get the same output, right? And that's hard. That's a difficult conversation to have, because then you get down into the nitty-gritties, right, of having to understand our own experience and how we've experienced the world, and it becomes a problem for people because it will, that conversation triggers people in a different way, right? You know, if I grew up in a, I don't know, affluent place with two parents and went to private school, but I was, I don't know, you know, seriously abused for most of my life by two horrible parents, right? That may trigger me in a way to go, you know, what do you mean? Like, you want to know how hard I had it, right? Rather than thinking, okay, look, we're not saying that you didn't have it hard or as hard as somebody that grew up in that other kind of system. We're just talking about equity here and what opportunities lie and what that means and how we experience the world, right? And it becomes such a muddy and difficult conversation because we see the world through our own eyes, right? And so it's very, very, very difficult to see the world like through somebody else's eyes with their projector. Yeah, not just through their eyes in their shoes, but with their story, with their tape running over and their personality traits and all of that stuff. It becomes such a muddy conversation because it's very, I think it's very difficult for us as humans, it certainly becomes it, or it looks like it to me, for us to advocate for other people's experiences away from our own. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because we're so entrenched in our own experience that looking at someone else's experience, for example, some examples are good. I recently commented on a Jordan Peterson post where he had talked about white privilege, and he's very clever with his words, isn't he, Jordan Peterson? He said something on the first slide to basically say that he doesn't say that white privilege doesn't exist. Then on the second slide, he said something that is actually a crime to say that someone has certain things because, or doesn't have certain things because of their race. And I commented and said, actually, it's not a crime to say, it's not a crime, right? And a lot of people were like, no, it's a crime, you shouldn't say this, da, 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 da. And what I see inside that conversation is some people want to defend their position and say that, for instance, white privilege doesn't exist. White privilege doesn't exist because they can't step into the shoes of someone who isn't them and actually view life and their life experience of, say, and I just use America for example, a white American who's middle class, like he said, come from picket fence family, and look at someone like George Floyd and look for his experience of his life through his eyes. Because if they were to do that, they would see their life in a way that they've never looked at before, and they might actually have to experience some sort of uncomfortable emotions, some shame, and maybe even feeling like they should have done more with themselves with all the opportunities that are present in front of them. So it's almost like there's a barrier for a lot of us to step into other people's shoes because of the uncomfortability. But also I feel that maybe, is it that we're not really trained to do that? More and more we're kind of trained to be more and more individual, to only see things from our own point of view and become more entrenched. So it's becoming harder for people to step out of their experience and stand in someone else's experience and really empathize to a really deep level that would have them go, shit, I feel like I want to do something, or this isn't right, or anything like that. If that makes sense.
It makes total sense. And I think, like, you know, you've touched on a few points there. I want to try and pick up a couple of them if I can. Like the first one is like, when it comes to the race thing as well, what it takes for a white person that has that privilege to step into your shoes, right? So for me to step into your shoes would be that to then expose my own shadow parts, should we call them that, that have fed into the very systems and things that would cause you the pain and the struggle. And if I remember back to what was going on with George Floyd, what a lot of people, white people particularly, were saying was that I'm worried to have the conversation because I'm worried I might say the wrong thing and then be seen as racist, right? And I reflected on that as at the time, I remember reflecting on it and thinking, I kind of relate to that. Why does that resonate with me? I kind of resonate with thinking that. But when I scratched the surface a little bit further, I think a lot of what I would have meant if I'd have vocalized I'm worried about saying the wrong thing was actually, I'm worried about exposing the parts of myself that might still have racism within them. So That's slightly different. That means actually exposing myself and going, I'm part of this system, right? And so I need to risk, right? And I need to be able to be in a space where I risk exposing that, right? And I allow myself a level of naivety, perhaps, or ignorance, where I go, listen, I know my core objective is to be able to see it from your point of view. And so I need to allow myself to be exposed, to be wrong. And then it goes back to what I say about being wrong, right? And then go, actually, no, I can see how that's played into that. I can see my own sort of unconscious bias and all that kind of stuff. And I'm willing to move towards and change that, right? Now that takes a level of self-understanding and a lot of risk and a willingness to do that, right? And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with in the context of doing that, right? When you talk about Jordan Peterson online, like you, I think he's very, very clever with his words. And what he will do is he will use a nuanced conversation while dolloping in lots of very black and white thinking into a nuanced conversation that then makes it very difficult to disagree or argue back against what he's saying. Although you can sometimes have a sense and a feel that what he's saying isn't fully right, he's very, very good at making it difficult to argue against, right? To try and make him wrong. So then that can make you question yourself and think, is it me? What's wrong? And then it becomes and then you can find yourself almost gaslighting yourself, right? Because you want to go in these instances. There's so many times I want to go, yeah, he's wrong, what he's saying. But I just don't know if I've got the level of articulation to be able to make him wrong. But I do believe he's wrong, right? And people don't like that because that individualism that you talked about as well, right? We always want clear fact. Show me the data, clear fact as well. And we take away that ability to just go, I don't like what this person's saying, and I can't really articulate why. I'm not wholly sure why. And no, I can't necessarily make him wrong, but it's not resonating and I don't feel like I agree with it. Right. And if you just did that, then you'd get called, weak and sitting on the fence and all that kind of stuff. When actually, I think it takes strength to sit on the fence until you know which side you want to jump down, and then by the way, know that once you do jump down, you can jump back up on that fence and reevaluate. And I guess in a way it's ridiculous that you have to pick a side in every conversation anyway, right? Which is what happens.
Yeah. In this polarized world, there's always almost this push to push you one way or the other, so that I guess it makes us feel something. There's this constant need I see in the media, and even people like Jordan Peterson, he does it very well. Like you said, he talks about these very nuanced points, but often you'll read something that he says, or like I said, also other medias, and you feel something. They want you to feel something constantly. Like some sort of sense of outrage or agreement almost. It's always pushing you in one of those two directions.
Yeah. And that, that's because we also live in a world that wants you to stop, right? Because we live in a world that wants you to stop scrolling. So what you're fed online through media outlets, news outlets and stuff like that, it's not, the news is not like a top level look at everything that's going on in a reflective way. It's not that anymore. I don't know if it ever was that, but it certainly isn't now. It's clips to make you stop, either flicking through the channel or to stop scrolling and look at the piece of content. And a surefire way to get people to stop is to be polarized, and also to use fear. And we know that people don't stop as easily on something that's going to make them happy. I mean, I deleted all the news apps on my phone, right? So I don't have any media outlet on my phone, right? And I went away this weekend and we were staying in a caravan with the kids. And so the news was on the telly in the morning, and it was really hot on Friday in the UK, right? And the news on Sunday morning was not just like how lovely it was that we got some really nice weather yesterday. The news story that they went with was that it was really, really hot, but everybody had the same idea and tried to rush away to stay somewhere, and it just caused chaos. And it's not fun when it's like that. I thought, Like, how have you pulled a negative out of yesterday? How high it was? Do you know what I mean? Because you can't just be happy. And you see, like, so many people have started these like happy news magazines where it's just happy news, or these online things, and they're great. And I love the idea of them, but they almost never take off because people don't stop on them. And so they just don't work because people want that stress all the time, you know, because it's addictive. The stress hormone's addictive, right? Well, people love it.
Yeah, it's so true. You see, I've seen some of these happy news, and you're like, you kind of go there once or twice. You go to it once or twice. You're like, oh, this is nice. Yeah, this is nice. It literally just makes you feel nice.
Yeah.
And it just isn't as, I don't know if it's as satisfying. I'm like you. I've removed all news. The only news I have on my phone is sports news, and even that, I'm starting to see the same trend of like, if it's football news, it's like sensational transfer might happen possibly at some point in the next week. You're like, wow, it always has to be like, has to really get you like that.
I got rid of that as well. See, I got rid of the sports news as well, because it's like, I don't know, there's a game yesterday and I want to know the score, but I've got to trawl through 4 stories to find, you know, they're all about a fight that happened outside the stadium. I think I wasn't there. I just want to know the score. Give me the score. So I deleted that. I actually, on that subject, I don't know, you know, Johann Hari? Do you know who that is?
Did he write a book?
He's got a few books. Yeah. His latest one is called Stolen Focus.
Oh, yeah,
and he talks about consuming the news once a day in the morning in the way that we used to in the paper, right? So you used to buy paper, you would read it, the sports at the back, and then you'd read the news, pick out the stories at the front and read the news. That was it. You didn't see the news until the next day. Whereas now you're fed the news every 10 minutes if you're not careful, right? Particularly with the addictive nature in which we use our phones. And I used to have a thing that I would do with my phone. Every 10 minutes, I would pick it up and I would go Sky News, BBC News, Sky Sports News, at least 3 times an hour, right? And so I'm being fed all of this stuff that's triggering me and putting me in the stress response all of the time. You know what I mean? And so getting rid of them and just consuming the news now based on stories that I might have seen, because socials will show you that, you know, or the way that people talk. And then I'll Google them, which still isn't ideal, by the way, because you're still getting filtered through somebody else's system. But you can go and I'll Google them and I'll see them in that way. And honestly, it was weird how hard it was, by the way, for the first like week or two, not having them on there. But how much it's changed my life, like dramatically, really. The impact it's had has been huge.
Wow. I might take that one on. I know Mark Manson, he's got a wonderful blog post about attention diet, I think it is. And he talks about only checking the news on Wikipedia because they strip out all the opinion. So they just tell you what's happening. So it's like one page, Wikipedia news, dry as fuck, really boring. He goes, and if you can do that for more than a week, then carry on. But actually, you'll go there to Wikipedia news, you read it and be like, oh yeah, so this thing happened, then this happened somewhere else, and this other thing happened. And then that's it. There's no opinion, there's no sensationalization in there. They just give you the information that is news.
Yeah, that's so good. And what it does is it pushes you back to other things to consume. So I read again a lot more now. Now I've got rid of the news apps. If I've got 20 minutes, I sit down, I get my book out, rather than just flicking through news stories and 5,000 different opinions on them. That Johann Hari talks about the junk food for the mind, you know. It's like we're just it's like we're doing the equivalent of just eating junk food all of the time, fast food every single day, right? When actually you need to like slow down and think, what am I putting in my brain here? What am I consuming? You know, and you see it with the things that happen, you know. The recent one was the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case. It's just on everyone's just consuming it. It's like just fast food for the mind all day, every day, and everyone's in it, right? And I don't think you have to scratch the surface very hard to realize it can't be that healthy, that's what we're obsessed with consuming, right? So you have to put a fork in the road on a personal level, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know how we took this tangent a while ago, but I come back to I love conversations like this actually, because I always say to guests, I'm like, oh, I have a few questions. And sometimes I barely ask the questions, but there is one that I always ask, and I'm going to ask it now, because if I don't ask it now, then we won't do it at all. Which is, I always love to hear people's journey. Like, what was your journey to do the work that you do today?
Can I just ask, that's got to be a record? Is it 40 minutes before you've asked what is normally the starter question?
It is.
That's got to be the starter question. Normally we're nearly 40 minutes in, or maybe a little bit less than that. Look, for me, the reason I started doing the work, when I was 24 years old, I stopped drinking. Okay, so I'll be 35 in a few weeks. So nearly 11 years ago, I stopped drinking. And up until that point, that stage of my life, like I just bumbled through life, struggled through life, used alcohol a lot, alcohol and drugs. I created the idea that I was a party animal, live fast, die young, and all that kind of stuff. And I had a failed marriage and 4 children by that time. I always held down a job, mainly because I knew that if I did, I always had some money to get drink and drugs, really. But I quit drinking when I was 24. Through like a series of events led me to a place where I realized alcohol wasn't working anymore, right? And when I quit, it was the 14th of May 2012, and the last day I drank, do you watch football? You say you like sport. Do you watch much football? Yeah. You know when Aguero scored that goal in the last second to win the Premier League, that was the last day I drank, right?
Wow. And
I remember that goal going in and being in the pub and looking around and just thinking, this isn't working anymore. Like, I don't know what to do, but this isn't working. Incredible, by the way, because every year around that date, that gets played on the telly, and I can't listen to it without making me cry. I go on YouTube and just watch it sometimes, and Aguero. And I remember, like, that was like, I probably took my last drink within hours of that happening. But what happened is, when I stopped drinking, what happened for me is that, like, everything that I'd ever been running away from came flooding back, right? And I started, like, I thought I'd quit alcohol and everything, if I quit alcohol, that's my problem, that I'll run away into the sunset and live a happy life. And that didn't happen, not remotely. I mean, I pretended it happened, but it didn't. In fact, my life got worse. That's the truth. I mean, like, I did like a month or 2 where it was like just amazing. And then the thoughts and feelings that I used to have when I was drinking came back. The behaviors came back. Yeah. Some of those like manipulative, scheming behaviors that I used to blame on alcohol, I'm doing them 3-4 months sober. And I'm like, this ain't good. I can't even blame drink or drugs now. I can't even keep saying, if I knock the drink on the head, I'll stop being such an arse, right? I can't do that anymore. And I really, really struggled. And then I was 9 months sober when I planned to take my own life, because I just thought, I can't deal with anything now. And, what I think is important to understand is that people say you should talk about the ways that you feel. I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm really struggling with my mental health, right? Or, oh, I've got a real bad bout of depression. I was thinking, I want to fight everyone. Like, I hate my kids. I don't like, these are the things I was thinking. I don't think people are ready to hear that stuff. Right? Do you know what I mean? Like, and I was distressed, massively distressed. And I planned to take my own life, and I went to see my kids, and because I knew I was going to die, the past became irrelevant and the future was non-existent. And for the first time ever, I was present with my kids. Right. And I changed my mind, but more importantly than changing my mind, I sort of realized that, what was killing me was this emotional stuff. And it was from there that I really started to reach out and look to try and make sense of my pain. And that's the journey that I've been on the last 10 years. And what I found is that comes into what we were saying previously about labels and stuff like that, is that actually so many of the things that I might label make a lot of sense when I look at them in the context of my life and my experience. The social, cultural, family experiences that I had growing up that I now believe shape everything of who I am. A lot of my pain and distress makes a lot of sense. And actually, I believe there's so much power in that, in understanding that so much of my struggles are a reaction to something. So much of like my adult struggles started off as survival mechanisms when I was a child. If I learn that, right, then it gives me some power. It gives me the power back. I think it takes the power away from us when we just label our struggles as being something, and then we just go, well, that's just the way that I am. You know, actually, I want to know why I'm like it, and I've discovered lots of reasons why I'm like I am, and it's given me a lot of power. It hasn't made everything better and all my problems go away, not remotely, but I do feel a certain amount of power over what I struggle with. And that's what I wanted, you know, and I've found a way to be able to share that with people in a way that resonates. I guess that's why I do what I do, to come back to the question.
It's really interesting you say there is that you saw drinking as like a sounds like, you didn't say exactly this way, as like a reaction to the pain that you'd experienced, and also as a way to escape from the thoughts and feelings that would creep in if you weren't drinking. And we live in a world now where, you know, we talked about media addiction, for instance. There's a lot of things that people find themselves addicted to. Phones, probably the most acceptable addiction that we kind of have in this day and age. Work, fitness, exercise are ones that people are really, you know, no one really questions you if you're addicted to fitness, really, or you're addicted to work and you're doing very well at it. So would you say that most addiction really is some way to escape a level of uncomfortability, whether emotionally or mentally?
That's exactly what it is. That's what I believe. When you find something that works, that soothes your pain, that takes you away, then, you know, it's natural that you're going to obsess about it if you're in a lot of pain. Like, it makes total sense, right? As a reaction. That, I don't know if I use them words, but that's exactly what I believe it is, a reaction, right? I think it's a symptom, a reaction of an internal struggle. And you know, I always say, if alcohol was invented now, it would be either two things. It would either be illegal, right? Because if I said there's this new liquid drug that if a teenager was to drink a liter of this clear liquid, you know, they'd have a good chance of dying if they drank it fast enough. It would make them completely black out. It might make them get involved in sexual things that they wouldn't want to. It might make them angry, violent, fight. It's going to dehydrate them to the point of being violently sick. That, right? People would be like, get that off the street. Yeah. So it would either be illegal, or, I don't want to be too controversial here, but the second thing that it could be is the pharmaceutical companies would be like, this shit works. Yeah. And then so it would be packaged up and it would be used as a way of prescribed in a nature that helps people deal with their pain, right? And you'd go to the doctors and get a certain amount of this liquid that you'd have every day, just enough to take the edge off, that makes everything all right. So that's the two things that I think would happen to it if it was invented today. The second one's probably a bit more controversial. I don't know if I should have said it, but I believe that to be true.
Yeah, I've never thought about the second one. The first one, that it'd be illegal, I think we could all, I think everyone will kind of see it's like this liquid that causes so much harm and damage to people. If it was invented now, there would be a very strong campaign, you know, say no to alcohol. You know, you'd have the modern day equivalent of Nancy Reagan going everywhere, and like there would be really, or like you said, pharmaceutical companies would package it up, sell it to GPs. GPs would say, yeah, you know, if you're struggling to sleep, just have a little bit of this, maybe, you know, 4 or 5 hours before you go to sleep, and it just helps you get off nice and easy. You know, they'd package it up and sell it, and it'd be prescribed like, you know, sleeping tablets and Prozac and all sorts of things. Have a little bit in the morning. It'll just perk you up a little bit for your day. But no, it's pretty wild when you think of it in that way. But yeah.
Because, you know, when you look at a drug's a drug, right? A drug's a drug. You know, cannabis is the other one, right? So I just, you know, you see what's happening is that there's a panic from the big pharma companies from cannabis, because they're like, now people are talking about it in a medicinal value. We better get on board with this, and we better be the ones that lead and sell it. Otherwise, people are going to start using it. You know, and this is why. Fucking hell, I don't want to get too controversial here, but you This is why you have to look at the societal and cultural impacts of what happened, right? There's people make huge profit when we medicalize natural human emotion, right? People make huge profit. Now, that's not to say that the people that make the profit are bad people and are going to manipulate that. But we fucking better make sure we're asking tough questions of the people that are making billions and billions of pounds out of handing out all this medication to people for their mental struggles that are being medicalized. I want clear answers, because if you look at like physical problems, say like diabetes, yeah, the way you might know that you've got diabetes is you might go to the doctor and say, I'm lightheaded, right, all the time. And the doctor might go, okay, that's a symptom of diabetes. Let's do a blood test, right? And they do a blood test, they go, oh, your sugar levels are low, that's diabetes, right? So you have the symptom, yeah. Then you have the diagnosis, and in the middle you have the blood test, and it's, I've got diabetes. Oh, how do you know you've got diabetes? Oh, because I'm lightheaded all of the time. Oh, right. Why are you lightheaded all of the time? Because I've got low blood sugar. Oh, right, that's diabetes. If you take something like depression, for example, yeah, there's no physical test on you. You don't go, oh, I feel down all the time. All right, let me go to the doctors. All right, and the doctor says, oh, you got depression. Well, how do you know I got depression? Because you feel down all the time. Or why do you feel down all the time? Because you got depression. So you're caught in this loop. There's no blood test, right? So we're trusting people, right, to diagnose us based on questions. Now, if you ask me if I felt down all of the time, feel down a lot. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I feel down a lot. Right. How on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad do you feel? 9. Right. If I'm saying 9, yeah, you can ask me all these questions, but if you're not asking me how much do you like your job, because if I hate my job, right, and I'm stuck in a marriage that I hate, right, and I don't see my kids, then I might show the symptoms for depression all the time, right, as a reaction to that. Now the solution in an ideal world would be to get a job that I like, to be in a relationship that I like, and to not have problems with my kids, right? Now, if you can't change those 3 things, then what's your next option? You go to the doctors, you get medicalized, right? You could be given antidepressants, or you could drink every night, or you could smoke weed every night, right? And you see, so this is why you have to look at the cultural impacts of things. And then the problems you got is people go, yeah, but the doctors now will ask. Of course they will. They'll ask those questions of context. But when I was 21, yeah, and I was struggling desperately, if the doctor said to me, what's your life like? I wouldn't have said shit. I'd have said, well, that's fine. Yeah, I work hard, got a good job. Did you have a difficult upbringing? No, it's fine. It was a bit tough like everybody else, but it was fine. Oh, well, this must be depression then. But here we are, fast forward 10 years on from then, and I've been able to wake up a little bit and see my life in a wholly different context. The answers to those questions would have been wholly different. I was in a job I hated. It was dead end. I've got an overactive mind. And so to be in a job that didn't use that was hugely stifling for somebody like me. I was in a marriage that I hated, that I did hate. And my childhood was desperately, desperately difficult, but I wasn't in a position to even open my eyes to that yet. So you see, the point is that I'm not saying that the medicalization of our emotions is wrong. What I'm saying is that when there's no physical test, like there is with something like diabetes or a physical struggle, then we got to be asking questions about stuff, you know. I've gone off on this. I'm blaming you. I don't normally go off on these tangents. I normally on podcasts I keep nice rounded answers. I don't know how we got there.
But it's true, because even when you're saying there, for you, when you were 21, right, if the doctor had asked you those questions, some of that is influenced by the people around you, whether that's friends and family, right? So say, fast forward now to this day and age, right? I'm 38 years old. And if I go to doctors now, and not necessarily in my life now, and he said to me, oh, how's your job? And I say, oh, it's all right. But if everyone around me also hates their jobs, I see that as normal. That's okay to hate your job. Everyone hates their job. And if all your friends are in marriages that they hate, And you think that's just how marriage is because you saw that of your parents. You'll just go to your doctor, I'm not that. You know how it is, doc. And maybe the doctor's in a marriage he hates as well. So he'll go, yeah. And what's happening with you might not really be spotted because simply of the normalization that comes from being around the people you're around, that you just think this is how life is, right? For a lot of people, they move through the world and they assume the way that their life is how life is, as you talked about earlier, right? Is we can't always see outside of our, I don't want to call it an echo chamber, but outside of our sphere and be like, wait, is what I'm experiencing and feeling and what I've experienced in my past, is this kind of quote unquote normal? Because normal is a strange word when you really think about it, when you talk about life and experience, but is this normal? Is this okay? And it can be really hard for us to actually see that, and then you kind of throw in addiction and say, for instance, that we have a family history of addiction, right? Or we have people around us that are addicted and we don't even see it. We just see that is how it is. Then we end up in these states where it's like, well, this is how it is. This is how it is. I don't even need to see a doctor because this is just how life is.
Well, exactly. And everybody gets a little bit sort of icky and awkward when we say the word normal, right? And that's because you can't define it. Like, who gets to define what a normal brain is, right? Who gets to define if my brain thinks too much? Who gets to define that? Somebody whose brain doesn't think too much? Or some, do we go, well, 70% of the people's brains isn't that active, so you're in the 30%, so that's not good. Why is it not good? What? I might say that it's special that I'm in the 30%, right? So this thing of normal becomes really, really important when we're talking about these things, as does, let's say, culture, right? Somewhere along the line, for me to define what you're struggling with mentally, right? Let's say depression or addiction, someone has to make a set of questions, right? Someone has to make these set of questions. I don't know, what's going on in your life? In the scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel? And then somebody has to make these questions. And then somebody, somewhere along the line, has to define what normal is. And if you look at the history of the DSM or whatever it's called, right? The Diagnostic Booklet, yeah? I guarantee you the people that are pulling that booklet together is not a round table of a single Asian lady living in the UK, a white privileged man living in the USA, a black man who's grown up on a single council. I guarantee you it's not a round table of people voting on it like that. So then who gets to define what normal is? And by the way, if you grew up in a culture in a different country and then came to the UK and your culture says something, and I'm making this up completely, but your culture said that when somebody close to you dies, they become a spirit and they live with you, and your culture, that's how you make sense of your pain. Yeah. And it works in your culture. Everybody believes that. That's how they deal with death, right? And it's great for them. It helps them, right? What happens if you come and live in the UK and then you go to the doctor and you say, well, yeah, my mum died, but she's a spirit now and she's always with me. Well, a white Western doctor is going to think, well, that's delusional thinking. Something wrong here, right? So it's not just that culture is important. It's at the heart of the conversation. It's at the heart of the conversation. So I read a book, sorry, I'm going off here, but I read a book called The Globalization of the Western Mind. Yeah. And they looked at when all these things happened, when there was a tsunami in one part of the world, and there was an example, and I sort of built the example I just gave you out of this example, where a woman had lost all of her family, right, to this tsunami. And within a couple of months, she was dealing with it really, really well, right? And she said to all these Western people that came over, because the Western people went over there, yeah, you're all going to be struggling with trauma, yeah, because us Western culture, we know better than the whole of the world, because our science is the best, and so we know. So they've gone over there, and they're saying to this woman who's made sense of her pain, no, they're with me, they've gone, they're spirits now, right? Or whatever she was saying. That's not exactly what she was saying, but it was, to that effect. Western people are going over going, no, you're going to fall soon. Like, you need to come back to reality because this is trauma. And they strip how she makes sense of her pain. And then all we've got for her after that, by the way, is medicalization. oh, you've got PTSD now. She didn't need a PTSD diagnosis. She had made sense of her pain, see, in the culture that she existed in. But culture is important because in Western culture, we just think we know better than everybody else, and we think that our science is automatically better. And so we're helping these poor people in the rest of the world who haven't caught up with our knowledge of what it is to struggle yet, when actually I've certainly found when I've been able to make sense of my pain and distress, it hurts me a lot less. The pain doesn't go away, but it hurts me a lot less. Am I ranting?
No. What I really heard there was what's really important for us is Western medicine often doesn't steer us towards trying to make sense of our pain. It steers us towards creating a barrier between the pain and moving forward with our life. So it's like, you need to take these drugs because they'll stop the pain, you feeling the pain, and then you'll be able to get on with your life. But in fact, as we know, that pain gets carried around with us constantly. And actually it's important for us to do is look at it and go, why? What's happened here? And start to make sense of it so that we can understand what happened that caused us pain, why, how that affects us, and how that affects us going forward. So then we can not reduce the effect of the pain, but shift our relationship to it so we can create new meaning moving forward. In the same way you talk about this woman with the tsunami, like she lost her whole family, but she made sense of the pain in a way that she could sit with and be comfortable with and be healed to a certain degree. You know, I did an episode of a guy called Eddie Elsey, and he said a lot about healing was just being able to enjoy life going forward, right? So she has a system that works for her and in her culture, allows her for healing and for her to move forward, because she'd made sense of it in a way that worked for her, so that she could get on with her life and be happy and enjoy what life has to offer. But in fact, Western medicine traditionally doesn't necessarily want us to make sense of it. They just want us to kind of create a barrier, take some medication and get on with it and move forward.
Exactly, right? And I mean, you've summarized what I've said just perfectly, to be honest with you. And I'm glad you did, because I was worrying that I was sort of just going all around the houses. But for you to summarize it in that is exactly what I'm saying. And it's not to say, just to hold space for the other side, it's not to say that medication is bad, right? There's absolutely use for it, right? I'm sure there is. But it shouldn't be what you just said, right? Which is that barrier and just that blanket. Get on with your life, take these now and you'll be all right. If I were to look at it, I might say, you're an extreme case. Let's get you some medication to make life manageable for a moment, because this is too much for you, right? But let's work with you holistically as well to make sure that we're not just masking it. Let's work with some of that pain. Let's take the edge off and let's work together with that pain and get you to a place where you can find some kind of healing in the way that you said, where life can have meaning and feel at least semi-enjoyable moving forward, you know? And I think that's what we should all be shooting for.
Yeah, to enjoy life, to have meaning. I'm interested in your thoughts about things like Alcoholics Anonymous and Sex Addiction Anonymous, things like that. Do you find those programs to be healing for people?
When I first got sober, the first thing I did is I went to an AA meeting, and I did 12-step fellowships for a number of years, probably 5 or 6 years, maybe even a little bit longer than that. I think the 12 steps in principle of what the 12 steps is, I think it's brilliant. I think it's absolutely brilliant. I'd actually say everybody should try and do it, because I think it's hugely healing. I think finding a group of people with a common bond is hugely healing. And I found that in the 12-step fellowships originally at the beginning. The reason I don't go to them as much anymore is because what I found is that as I began to make sense of my pain in a certain way, it didn't fit into the ways in which the groups were making sense of their pain, right? So I had to find a new group that understood the way that I was making sense of my pain, right? And I think that's normal, and I think that makes sense. So, you know, I would say to anybody that's on the brink with their drinking, I would say go to AA, right? That is what I would say. And this is a nuanced bit again that's just really difficult for a lot of people. You may outgrow it in a number of years' time. You may not. Some people don't. And, you know, as somebody who's not been there for a few years, I never say I don't. I do say I don't go. That would be a lie if I said I never say that. In my mind, I've not closed the door. I never close the door on anything. You know, I might go back there tomorrow, right? I might do. So yeah, that's where I'm at with them. The 12 steps in itself, I think, is an incredible program. I think that the kind of flip, the harder conversation around that is that when you get any group of people together that's self-run, and this is not just true of 12-step fellowships, I think it's true of any self-run demographic of people, you get a level of like sort of dogma, and I'm going to bring the word toxicity in again, that is not a reflection of what it's all supposed to truly be about. And that happens, I think, with most self-run groups. And I think that can happen in any 12-step fellowship as well. I'm always a little bit worried that what I say, because, you know, what some people will hear is that I've just said that AA is toxic and full of dogma. That's not what I've just said. But some people will hear it anyway. So, I mean, there you go.
Yeah. But there's a couple of things in there. It's like the outgrowing feels, and it's one of the reasons I actually asked is because I've worked with a couple of men in terms of, you know, around their dating, relationship and intimacy, who formerly went to AA, Sex Addicts Anonymous, and they've said exactly the same thing to me. So like there come a point where they're just like, I don't really need to go here anymore, and actually going here is holding me back. It's stopping me from growing to a certain degree, which I can really understand. And also around when we have any self-run organization, and I think this is probably true of almost every single organization that exists, there's some level that, especially when there is someone that started it and they implemented some rules and way in which it should work, over time, the natural thing to do is to take on new information and evolve it. But people can often be really stick to the way it was and be like, oh, no, this is the way it has to be. And that's what I feel is where dogma and a kind of toxicity kind of creep in, is when we are not willing to look at something that is self-run and self-governing, and also then take on new information that comes to light over time in history and go, actually, there's a better way to do this thing here, and there's another way to do this. It's when we kind of stick to like, oh, this is how John started it in 1956, so we should never change this thing. We forget that when John started it in 1956, he had the best information he had at that moment, and actually there's better information now that exists. It's a bit like church. That's my experience of church. It's like there's this book from like thousands of years ago, and no one's willing to go, actually there's some bits of this that probably don't work so well now in this modern age. They're like, no, this is the word of God, and we can never go against this. It's like, well, no, we need to move forward because humanity shifted a bit, and they didn't have the internet back then, or running water, and, you know, things like that. So maybe some of those things aren't quite true, and I could see where that could kind of come into any sort of group of people, you know, whether that is certain types of self-help, even parts you can see where the dogma start to get created because people aren't willing to move forward and say that, oh, this thing isn't as good as it was back in the day, or there's new information that moves us forward.
Anything that stifles curiosity is a problem, right? It's a problem because you can't move and evolve. Now, what you say about religion's true. Like, I think if you take all these really old books and read them in the context of people trying to make sense of the world and their pain back then, they're incredible books. I've never read one that I don't think is incredible, and I've read a lot of them, right? From the Bible to some of the Quran. I've read a lot of them, and I read them as spiritual pieces of text, right? And I think they're great when you do that. And there's lots of mysticism in them, right? And unanswered questions, and I love that. When you take the AA, one of the problems that you've got that make curiosity different, right, is that they're self-run by a lot of people that are, and they're going to hate me for saying this, but I can say this because I was one of them. When you get sober, right, in the first year, when you stop drinking, you're off your nut, right? You're batshit crazy, right? Because you've got all this stuff coming up, yeah, and you've used the drug to get rid of it for all your life, and now you can't. And so you get really like evangelical as well. Yeah. Like everyone needs to, and so you'd have to be careful in letting a group of people like that evolve something, right? Because it would just be right, it would be nuts. So there's a level of like, no, we need to make sure that we fix in what's here. And if you take going off again a little bit here, but sober communities in general, they've existed for years and years and years. Way before AA, there was something called the Washingtonians. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Washingtonians.
No.
The Washingtonians were a group of people that got sober as a group, and they started doing this sober thing. This is going back before AA started in 1940 something, I think. So it's before then. I think it was the early 1900s, and they grew across America and I think across the world before social media and all that. And they were massive. Then they had places at the table of politics because they became such a group so quickly. And I'm paraphrasing here because my knowledge of it's not really, really clear. But essentially what happened is because they got this, they were sober and they could change the world, they started taking that and then wanting ideas in politics, and as quickly as they came about, they disappeared. Because loads of them started drinking again, and then and it was loads of problems and all that kind of stuff. And so when you look at the 12-step fellowships, and they have the 12 traditions, the 12 traditions are born out of trying to make a fellowship or a body, a group of people that would survive time without becoming like the Washingtonians. And so they have like a level of anonymity at press and radio, right? They do that on purpose because they don't want loads of people going out saying, I'm from AA and this is what you should do, and then a week later being in the paper because they're drunk and doing something horrific, right? So the traditions make sense and have probably been the reason that it has stood the test of time. And in the way that you just said, it makes it hugely restrictive because it stifles curiosity, which is a problem, which is a problem. So yeah, I don't know how I got there, but here we are.
And I'm interested in you've got curiosity and the importance of being curious. And I really deeply resonate with that on so many levels. Something I think, some of what I talk about is around dating and relationships and how we stop being curious in those areas of our lives with people that we meet. Stop being curious with people. That's one of the things we stop being curious of ourselves. How is that kind of related to our desire for escape, if it is? Because we kind of have this desire to escape from our lives, the kind of day-to-day sensations or the uncomfortability. Are those two things, curiosity and escape, related at all?
Yeah, look, I think escape is curiosity is not easy, right? I think if you look at like the most curious people that you will have interacted with as children, right? And it's before the world's got hold of them. And they're just curious, right? Life is full of wonder and they're picking things up and, they're doing all of these amazing things and they're just curious about everything. And that curiosity is sort of beaten out of them, right? Metaphorically, beaten out of them over the course of their life. Because curiosity becomes more difficult. It becomes more tricky, If I'm a young boy and I start getting curious about, oh, my nose is bigger than everybody else's, right? And then I look, and then I start, that curiosity leads me to feelings of pain and hurt, right? And then I've seemed to only have one eyebrow and everybody else has two, and I don't know. I'm trying to, you can see the notions of what I'm insecure about coming out here, right? But you see how that curiosity then gets stifled, and then it gets a frightening thing, and then you start building layers and layers and layers upon yourself to escape those difficult feelings. You can see how escape becomes your go-to, right? When you find something that makes you not have to feel these things, then you do it. And you can see the brain, and I think we're wired to kind of go into things that make us feel comfortable, yeah? And you can see it in children as they grow, and they find something that works and just numbs them out, and they do it, gaming and devices, and we've introduced all of those more and more to young people. And so I think we crave escape, because then we don't have to make sense of our pain, because making sense of our pain is not always easy, right? Because you start to realize that a lot of your pain originates in difficult relationships with the people that you really desperately want to love a lot, your mum and your dad and all those things. And then that gets really hard and murky, and you know, if you find cannabis and all you got to do is just smoke it down to the end and it all goes away. I mean, why wouldn't you? If it was difficult, why wouldn't you? Right. And I say that as somebody who's not used anything other than caffeine for over 10 years, but it makes sense to me. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So the desire for escape was almost born out of the pain that curiosity can create. And actually, I don't know if this resonates for you, is like to exit the escape is actually to go back to curiosity, right?
Yeah. 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 And it's a dangerous, like, there's huge risk with curiosity, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you don't want to be completely like, you don't want an endless amount of curiosity, because you don't want to go and touch that hot pan and think, I'm really curious about how much that would actually hurt. Let me go and touch it, right? You don't want to lean your head out the train window, right? Because you're curious about what would happen if you did, right? And so we learn that certain avenues lead us to pain, and so we don't do them. But what about when all of your thinking leads you to pain? Then you've got to find a way not to think. Yeah. And there's ways to not think. Drink and drugs and sex and your phone and, you know, fitness, whatever you find. If it works, right? At least you don't have to think. But in the end, and this is the work that I've done on myself, you know, and continue to do on myself. In the end, I want to untangle that mess, and I want to be able to have some curiosity, and I want to get curious about why all my curiosity always leads to pain, and understand that, you know,
and investigate whether the assumption around the curiosity always leads to pain is actually true.
Yeah, and find out if it is true, because I think if you get curious enough, it normally isn't. But you have to go. It normally is at the beginning, you know. Curiosity has led me countless times back to the fact that I'm not as nice a person as I think I am. Not always. That's not easy, because I'm one of the good guys. I want to be one of the good guys. So when curiosity leads me to the fact that I'm not always, shit, I'd rather not be curious. Or I go, let me be curious about why I'm not such a good guy in this instance, and where does that come from, and why does that happen? Can I move through that, and can I out myself as being not a very good person, and maybe move towards trying to be a better person? And actually what you find is the very act of outing yourself, it becomes like Eminem in 8 Mile, you know. You seen 8 Mile? Yeah, right. So, you know, at the end what he does, and I mean, actually, if you can live a life like that, you'll be all right, because no one's got anything on you. You're doing it, you're out in yourself all the time, you know. And there's a truth in that, right?
Yeah, there's like immense learning and wisdom can come through that, because those and it just go back to the conversation at the beginning. If you start looking at those shadow parts of us that cause us to be defensive, and we start leaning into them and going, okay, I'm willing to be that thing. Let me be that thing. Like, oh shit, there might be a part of me that's racist. There might be a part of me that is sexist. Like, let me be willing to confront that and look at it and be like, why is that part of me exist? You know, what is there? Is there a lesson here? Like, how did this develop? And go, yeah, sometimes I'm racist and sometimes I'm sexist. Like, I admit that. But actually, I see where that doesn't work for me in the world. So I'm going to look at it and see where it comes from and see what's on the other side of that. And then, in fact, that is the way in which we grow and become better people. And we start moving towards being the good guy that we actually want to be, and we'd like to see ourselves.
Yeah. And there's a level of responsibility in ourselves. There's a huge level of responsibility in ourselves. But I think there's a responsibility in us as a body, a group of people, a society, whatever word that you want to use, right? To understand that context is really important. And we shouldn't just cancel everybody who says something in the wrong way. We should go, hang on a minute, like what did they mean? Why did they say that? Are they willing to change? Have they noticed it as well, that they might have used the wrong terminology? And those things just become really, really important. And I think we need to do a lot of work around that as a society as well, to allow context, because context is really important. And what's the other word I'm looking for? Not just context, but intent. What was the intent here as well? Because that's really important. Yeah. When you take things like sexism or race and stuff like that, and you go, yeah, okay, he was being sexist in that moment. What was his intent? Did he mean it? Right? What was the context? Why did he say it? And what sort of person do we believe this person to be? Right? Because and do they deserve a chance to grow from this moment of having that, you know, sexist part of themselves exposed? Do they deserve a chance? I think a lot of people do. Some people won't take that chance, right? And if they don't, you know, willful ignorance is a whole nother thing. And there was a lot of that. If you looked at the kind of, particularly when the George Floyd thing happened, there's a lot of willful ignorance, yeah, which was people like being naive and ignorant on purpose, yeah. And you know, that's wholly different. But we what we often do is just muddy them all together, and then we don't pull them apart and go, well, actually, there's ignorance here and naivety from a good person who I believe, you know, if we can find a way to help them see their naivety, they would want to change. And then there's a whole other group over here who they don't want to see it. They don't want to know it exists, and there will be no way of showing them. And actually, in some ways, it's almost like, I think, should we stop wasting time on those people and get these people over here to understand more? I don't know. Maybe that's not right. I don't know, but you know,
it's actually, I always think back to my reading about the suffragettes. That was their tactic. They went, you know, when they were trying to get the vote for the women, they drew up lists of men they thought could be possibly, what's the word I'm looking for, that could resonate with their message. And they spoke to those people, and they left the people who they were definitely knew. They went to the people who could be a maybe, and they left the people who were a no and focused their energy on those maybe people, because turning those maybe people into a yes is more important than wasting so much energy on the people who are a definite no.
Yeah. Because, and also those people who might be a yes can easily be groomed or manipulated, are probably too strong words, but could be pulled over to the other side. I know a guy, Ivan, met years ago on the kind of speaking circuit, and he does a lot of work now against extremism and all that kind of stuff within schools. And he grew up in a place where there wasn't many Muslim people, right? So he wasn't used to seeing Muslim people. And then what happened with 9/11 and stuff, he started to become a little bit, he gained the idea that he should be scared of somebody that might be wearing a burqa, right? Now, Ivan, in his core, is a good guy. He was never allowed to say, he wasn't allowed to say that he felt scared by them. Now, his fear, by the way, was indoctored into him through mainstream media at the time, right? So it wasn't necessarily his fault that he gained that fear. You can talk about personal responsibility and but he gained that fear, and then he felt like every time he tried to talk about that fear, he was silenced and told that he was racist, right? And then what happened is he found himself online with this fear and nobody listening to him, and then he was pulled into the extreme side, and he ended up in I don't even want to say the chap's name, but I think we all know who the extreme right-wing chap is, right? And he ended up really high up within his group, yeah, and was like named in this guy's first book as one of his closest allies, right? Wow. Worked his way up. And then what happened for him was he went to organize, I think it was a fight with a Muslim group, and the Muslim guy invited him into his house. So he went into his house, they ended up sitting down, having a conversation. The Muslim guy told him everything that he was scared about with him, and Ivan told him everything. And what they realized is that they were both scared of the same thing, but they just needed to be heard. And these chaps now work together going into the schools against like anti-extremism and all, and they do that work, yeah. But you see how silencing his legitimate fear at the beginning and just blanket calling him racist was problematic, because he ended up right over the other side, when actually, if we had listened to him, help him make sense of what he was thinking and feeling, and showed him the other way and had those difficult conversations that he ended up accidentally having, you can see how he could have come over to the other side, right? And he's just one person. How often is that happening on a mass scale, where people that are in the middle that could easily be pulled over to, I'm going to say the correct side, because I believe it to be the correct side, right? How many people go over to the other side as a result of that? It's fascinating when you look at it like that.
Yeah. It's just having a space where what we're feeling can be heard without judgment. and be heard without ridicule or us being kind of labeled things. And it's so powerful because this is happening at every aspect of our lives, you know, that we're not speaking, we're not saying what we're feeling because of the environment does not allow us to, or we perceive the environment doesn't allow us to. And this happens from inside our own homes, with our families, up into our work, up into society, and any clubs and groups we're a part of, you know, even down to, you know, like Instagram stops you from saying certain things or posting certain types of pictures because they are censoring and silencing. And it does create this suppression of any of these feelings.
Yeah. And then there's always huge risk in what you say, right? And one of the ways that I've had to kind of combat that in the work that I do is with that I might be wrong. So if somebody calls me out and say, you shouldn't say that, I have a tendency to want to go to defend, right? And be like, well, I said it because it is, right? But I have to go, whoa, somebody's not happy with what I've said here. I need to look. And sometimes I might look and go, no, I think I'm right. Yeah. Or sometimes I might go, yeah, no, I can see that maybe what I said there is going to harm people. So let me change. Not easy.
No, it's not easy, but a very, very important skill to cultivate in ourselves.
Yeah. And I think in the world that we're moving into, I think we all have a responsibility to try and do that. I do believe that we have a responsibility to do that. I think we pushed all the responsibility onto those who have a platform, and I don't think that works, because then you have to regulate people then and say you can't say this, and then what you'll get is just people just being robotic because they're worried about the parameters of what they can move in. So actually I think we need to educate one another in the responsibility of the ways in which you digest content, right? And make sure that you do your research. And if you've watched a 30-second clip of somebody and it's made you angry and you hate that person off the back of the 30-second clip, there's a level of responsibility to make sure you go and research about this person. First, notice why you're triggered. Where does that come from? What's leading that? What's that about? And then if you really want to start, if it's motivating you to want to change or do something about it, then make sure you research the person that the clip's about and make sure that you get all the context, because it's really important. Because when we're triggered, I think we should first look inside. Why am I triggered? Is this to do with my own experiences? Does it matter? Is this just, has this video that I've just seen triggered me because of my past experiences, and I can just stop looking at the video because it's not making me feel very good? Or have I seen a video that has triggered me, and actually it's triggered me and made me want to create some meaningful change in the world? Well, that's okay too. But make sure you've done the research first on yourself and on the person before we start being all righteous and telling everybody what they should do and how they should change. We better make sure that we know what we're talking about first. And I think you see it all the time where people are calling for somebody to be cancelled or taken off the airwaves, and you think, you can ask a simple question: have you ever listened to what they talk about? And they're like, they don't even know they are, but they've been triggered by a small video online, and they've done no research other than that. And I think that research is important, because you talked about the suffragettes, right? They were triggered and angry by what was going on, and thank God they were. Thank God they were, right? But not every time we're triggered is it going to mean that a movement needs to happen. Sometimes it just means that I need to stop looking at certain content because I don't want to be involved in that. That's not my world. I don't want to experience the world in that way. Let me cut these people out, and that, in the world that we live in, that's harder now, isn't it? Because they just get slapped in front of your face all the time.
It's beautiful. We've almost done a full circle as we've been talking, and I see that time is really running away from us. Josh, I want to say a big thank you for such a enthralling conversation about so many different topics. I think it's been, I'm sure the listeners are like, wow, what a journey you've been on with us today in this conversation, because we really weave in and out of so many things. But I'd love you to tell the listeners where they can hear more from you, where they can work with you potentially, or any sort of workshops or programs you've got coming up.
Yeah, so my website is probably the best place to go, which is just joshconnolly.co.uk, and probably go and find me on Instagrams, where I'm most active. I think my website is just about to be overhauled, actually. I do a program called Inner You. I'll be releasing dates for that for the next cohort. I'm in the middle of the current cohort, but I'll be releasing dates for the next one soon. If you're interested about doing some of that internal work, that's a great way to do it. And I bring in breath work as well, which is something that I'm really passionate about. And we'll release dates for the next free session of that will come around quicker than you think. But yeah, come and find me online. And from my perspective, what you said about the conversation, this has been one of the best conversations I've had on a podcast for a long, long time. So I don't know how you've done that, but you've pulled stuff out of me that I don't often talk about on podcasts. So it's good. I've enjoyed it. Really, really enjoyed it.
Oh, so man, thank you. And listeners, I'm sure that me and Josh would love to hear from you if you've learned something in this episode, or this episode has triggered you in any way. Please feel free to reach out and tell us how you dealt with being triggered, before you decide to drop into our DMs and shout us. We'd love to hear how you looked at yourself and research a little bit, because it's always beautiful to hear from people. But we'll leave you there today and we'll say ciao, ciao.
Thank you.